Hello everyone, very good morning and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to our daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 8 important articles for a detailed discussion. We have 2 columns that are important for the mains examination, and the rest of the articles are very important for our prelims examination. So let's cover all these articles in complete detail so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us with your comments. Don't forget to press the like button and do subscribe to our channel. So before we start, we have an important announcement. We are offering flat 50% discount on our IAS courses along with a 6-month free extension. So you can make use of this offer to enroll for the English online course, which is starting from today, from 16th March. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this important editorial from page number 10. This editorial deals with the current state of inflation in the Indian economy. The editorial is concerned about the higher levels of food inflation which is being reported over the last few months. And it is examining the macroeconomic impact on India's growth prospects and as well as on inclusive growth in India. And that is the focus of this editorial. So let's look at the context first, and then we shall dive deep into this topic and understand many important concepts along with examining the viewpoint of the editorial. See, recently, the NSO, the National Statistical Office, which is under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, brought out the inflation data for the month of February. So according to the retail inflation data, which is measured through CPI or consumer price inflation, as per this data, inflation for February has remained almost flat compared to the previous months and even compared to the previous year. Overall inflation in the economy, that is retail inflation, has largely remained flat at around 5.1%. But however, the concern is that the food inflation has been increasing quite alarmingly, and food inflation has jumped to 8.66%. And this is the concern being highlighted by the editorial. Even though retail inflation appears to remain stagnant at around 5%, 5.1%, which is still within the target range, which has been provided to the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI. The concern is about the accelerating food inflation, which could hurt India's growth prospects as well. Because food inflation is considered to be very volatile. And as long as food prices remain volatile, it will impact the overall retail inflation in the economy. And this could have a cascading effect, a domino effect, which could affect the macroeconomic indicators as well. This could pose new challenges to the RBI and as well as to the government of India when it comes to containing food inflation levels. And any measures taken could hurt our growth prospects as well. Because inflation control, usually when it is done on the supply side, in order to manage the demand-supply situation, this could have a negative impact on consumption levels. It could affect demand in the economy and it could affect the growth prospects as well. So that is what the editorial is examining. So before we get into the details, let's understand some basic concepts. Let's start with the very basics. Let's understand what is inflation. Let's understand what is consumer or retail inflation and wholesale inflation. How does India measure inflation? What is CPI? Right? What is the Monetary Policy Committee? Let's cover these basics first, and then we will examine the arguments being made by the editorial. According to the European Central Bank, inflation refers to a broad increase in prices of goods and services. Generally, the prices of various goods and services that we all consume on a day-to-day basis, they will not remain stagnant. Depending on the demand-supply situation in the market, the prices might continue to rise, and if there is a persistent broad rise in the prices of various goods, commodities and services, then such a broad increase in prices is referred to as an inflationary situation. In an ideal economy, a moderate inflation is actually good. A moderate level of inflation is good to sustain demand and to promote growth in the economy. It is any day much better than having a deflationary situation. But problem arises when inflation starts going out of control. There are some countries which face the problem of runaway inflation. Like for example, Pakistan, Zimbabwe at one point, where inflation touches 30, 40, 60, 70%, right? So that is called as runaway inflation. But moderate levels of inflation, usually in the range of 2 to 4%, is very ideal for a growing economy because this helps in sustaining the demand and in promoting growth in the economy. But however, as inflation goes beyond a certain threshold, which is considered as beyond the tolerable limits, that is where the challenge begins, not just for the fiscal authorities, that is the government, but also for the monetary authorities, that is the central bank, the RBI, in the case of India. So it is very important to manage both demand and supply side constraints, to manage liquidity in the economy, to ensure that inflation levels are kept within the manageable limits. So if you look at different types of inflation which is measured, primarily there are two types. You have retail inflation and wholesale inflation. Retail inflation is nothing but inflation levels that are captured at the retail level, that is at the level of consumers. So we as consumers, we purchase various goods and commodities from the market, right? We make use of various services available in the market. So the price that we are paying for these goods, commodities and services, the fluctuation that these prices are undergoing at the consumer level, at the retail level, is nothing but your retail inflation. This is measured through an indicator called the CPI, Consumer Price Index. So in India, we use CPI inflation to measure retail inflation, that is inflation at the consumer level. Wholesale inflation, on the other hand, which is measured through WPI, the Wholesale Price Index, this captures inflation at the level of wholesalers, that is between the bulk producers and the bulk consumers, who are the middlemen involved in the supply chain. Let's say farmers are selling in bulk to various markets and the middlemen, right? Or industries which are producing various goods. They are selling them to their distribution channels, which later distribute the goods to the consumers. So inflation captured at the wholesale stage is your WPI, Wholesale Price Index. So broadly, inflation is measured through these two indicators, and both the indicators are crucial parameters for the monetary policy and fiscal policy authorities in order to control inflation in the economy. Be it RBI in the case of India or the finance ministry, right? They both keep a check, they keep an eye on the CPI levels and as well as the wholesale price inflation levels in the country. But the key monetary policy tool for the central bank, for the RBI, is retail inflation, that is CPI inflation. CPI data is used as the primary indicator to track inflation because this is what will hurt the consumers first. So given the impact of retail inflation on consumption at the consumer level, the RBI has set CPI or retail inflation as the key indicator for its monetary policy. Now, if you look at CPI inflation, in India, the broad CPI inflation data for both rural and urban areas is released by the NSO, National Statistical Office, which is under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now, this index, it contains a basket of various goods, commodities and services that we all consume on a day-to-day basis. So this includes the basic food items, vegetables, beverages that we all consume. It includes cereals, the vegetables that we purchase, the fruits, dairy and meat products, egg, right? So there is a weightage allocated for food and beverages under this basket. And as you can see here in this pie chart, food and beverages have the highest weightage within the CPI indicator. Almost 46% of the weightage is assigned to the food category. It also includes other goods, products, and services that we all consume. It could be housing, fuel and power, and various other products and services that we consume. They're all provided with a respective weightage within the CPI index. But the highest weightage, as you can see, is assigned to food and beverages category, and even fuel and light, essentially our power and energy requirements, also has a significant weightage. Now the concern is that food prices and power prices, right, or energy prices, they tend to remain very volatile. They are very market sensitive. They are very sensitive to the demand supply situation. If you look at food inflation and as well as fuel and energy inflation, they remain very sensitive to changes in market conditions, right? So they are often considered as very volatile. So any slight change in food prices and fuel and energy prices will have a significant impact on CPI levels because of their higher weightage in the CPI basket. So this is very, very important to understand. Now you can see that the CPI index has these different subcategories, but food, beverages, then fuel and power, they have the highest allocation, one of the highest allocation, and any changes here, any volatility in food and fuel prices will directly reflect in the CPI index. Is that clear? Now, let us understand the different types of CPI index that we have. Apart from CPI rural, urban or combined, which is released by the National Statistical Office, we have three other types of CPI inflation which is measured. We also have CPI for industrial workers, for agricultural laborers and rural laborers. These three indices, it is brought out by the Labor Bureau under the Ministry of Labor and Employment. Because retail inflation, or essentially CPI inflation, can actually help in understanding the impact on wages. Because inflation at the retail level reduces the purchasing power of your money. For example, let's say you can go and buy a liter of milk for 50 rupees today. 1 year later or 5 years later, the same 50 rupees will not fetch you 1 liter of milk if there is persistent inflation in the economy, right? You may be able to only purchase half a liter of milk with 50 rupees, which means the purchasing power of your currency, the value of your currency essentially has gone down, right? So this impacts the laborers, the workers. It has an impact on the labor market and also on the wages which is paid in the labor market. So to keep a track of the impact of inflation on laborers and their wages, the Ministry of Labor, through the Labor Bureau, brings out these three indices. CPI for industrial workers, agricultural workers, and rural laborers. All right? But the nationwide CPI level with regard to rural, urban, and combined, this is brought out by the NSO, the National Statistical Office, under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So to measure CPI, the NSO has set a base year, which is 2012. Compared to 2012 level prices, the data is brought out on a month-to-month basis, right? So essentially, the CPI indicator gives you an idea about the rise in prices in, let's say, this month compared to the last month of the last year. Essentially 12 months ago, with 2012 prices being used as a base indicator, right? So this becomes the primary monetary policy tool as well. This becomes the primary indicator for the RBI for employing its monetary policy tools. Now within the CPI inflation or retail inflation, we have headline and core inflation. This is again a very important concept. Headline inflation is nothing but the overall retail inflation or CPI inflation itself. The overall retail inflation is your headline inflation, right? Now, if you minus the food and fuel inflation from this, what you get is core inflation in the economy. Because as we discussed earlier, amongst all the goods, commodities and services which are included in the CPI basket, the most volatile, the most fluctuating happens to be food and beverages, fuel and energy. So if you exclude them, if you remove the inflation caused by food and beverages and fuel and energy, what you get is core inflation. Is that clear? So this becomes your core inflation, and the overall retail inflation, right? The overall CPI becomes your headline inflation. So these are the different indicators used by the monetary policy authorities to determine the monetary policy. Now, coming to the Monetary Policy Committee. Let's understand what is the Monetary Policy Committee and how CPI and other inflation data plays a role in determining the monetary policy of the country. See, until 2016, the Reserve Bank of India, the central bank, had the sole authority to determine the monetary policy, essentially by controlling the basic rates, the benchmark rates, starting with the repo rate, and by employing other monetary policy tools like cash reserve ratio, reverse repo rate, and SLR and other monetary policy tools. The RBI was solely responsible for the monetary policy of the country. But in 2016, there was a major change that was done. The RBI Act of 1934 was amended through the Finance Act of 2016 to establish the Monetary Policy Committee. The Monetary Policy Committee consists of 6 members. There are 3 from the RBI and there are 3 government-appointed members. Essentially, the government gave itself a role in the monetary policy of the country. Prior to this, RBI had the sole authority to determine the monetary policy and to vary the basic rates, the repo rate and the other monetary policy tools in order to manage liquidity and inflation in the country. But the government, which often had issues with RBI's monetary policy, right, amended the RBI Act through the Finance Act of 2016 and established this statutory body, which is the Monetary Policy Committee. So Monetary Policy Committee has representation from the RBI, and as well as there are few government nominated members, thus allowing the government to play a role as well in determining the monetary policy of India. So let's look at the composition of this committee. This committee is headed by the RBI governor. The RBI governor becomes the ex officio chairperson of this committee. That is, by virtue of being the governor of the central bank, the RBI governor will automatically become the chairperson of the Monetary Policy Committee. Apart from the RBI governor, there are 2 other senior officials from RBI. The RBI deputy governor dealing with monetary policy and another RBI board member. So these are the 3 RBI officials who are on board the Monetary Policy Committee. The other 3 members are nominated by the government. That is essentially the Finance Ministry, Ministry of Finance, will nominate 3 members, and this represents government's representation in the Monetary Policy Committee. So decisions by the committee are made by majority, right? 6 members will vote on the monetary policy stand of the RBI, and decisions are taken by majority. If there is a tie, the final casting vote lies with the chairperson, that is the RBI governor. All right? So since 2016, India's monetary policy is being managed by the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI, which includes these 6 members, 3 from RBI itself and 3 members from the Government of India. So now, the Monetary Policy Committee has been given a target range within which inflation levels have to be managed. When the RBI Act was amended in 2016 through the Finance Act, a specific inflation target range was given. An inflation target range has been provided. So this is a legal mandate on the Monetary Policy Committee. The Monetary Policy Committee is entrusted with the task of keeping inflation ideally at 4%. This is the prescribed target. But of course, it might be difficult to achieve the exact target. So there is a range of flexibility which has been given, which is plus or minus 2%. So the minimum inflation level which should be maintained is 2%. Ideally, it should be at around 4%. And the maximum tolerable limit of inflation is 6%. So anything within this range of 2 to 6%, this is within the tolerable limits that has been laid down by the amended RBI Act. Ideally, inflation should be maintained at around 4%, and this target range will be reviewed and updated once in every 5 years. The government and RBI will together determine the target and the range for inflation levels. This will be done once in every 5 years. The current target is 4% with a flexible range of plus or minus 2%. So if you look at February's inflation data, for February 2024, retail inflation, that is CPI inflation, was 5.09%. Let's say we round it off to 5.1%. Even in January 2024, retail inflation was at the same level, was at 5.1%, which means inflation currently in the country is within the tolerable range that has been prescribed for the Monetary Policy Committee. It is slightly higher than the ideal target, but it is less than 6%, which means it is still within the tolerable limits. Is that clear? So retail inflation by itself is not a concern as of now in India. The concern being expressed by the article is about rising food inflation. Food inflation within retail inflation has become a major concern because, as I told you, food inflation has increased to 8.66%. This is a massive jump. Over the last year, food prices have jumped by more than 300 basis points. This is very, very significant. And given that food prices are so volatile, it has a much bigger impact on retail inflation numbers, that is on CPI inflation. So this will drive the RBI, it will drive the Monetary Policy Committee to act. And if it tries to contain inflation, this could end up compromising growth. Because usually when it comes to macroeconomic management, when it comes to monetary policy, inflation control and promotion of growth are seen as contradictory to each other. Because if you try to control inflation beyond a certain limit, right, which has to be done by absorbing the excess liquidity, which means you have to increase the interest rates, you have to increase the repo rate. The moment that is done, the borrowing rates go up, and this will directly affect the growth prospects of the economy. And vice versa is also true. If you don't address inflation, right, and if you blindly focus just on growth, then inflation levels could become intolerable. So this is a challenge always faced by the monetary policy authorities. How do you strike a balance between inflation control and promotion of growth? Both are equally important. And if inflation is not managed, particularly food and fuel inflation, right, and if this keeps increasing persistently, this will affect the common man the most. The biggest price will be paid by the common man because they are the ones who will be affected by the rise in prices of day-to-day commodities, right? So as a result, this could become a big dilemma for the RBI and even for the government. This is politically very sensitive issue as well. So according to the editorial, even though retail inflation has virtually remained unchanged over the last several months, and even though retail inflation is well within manageable limits, the concern is about the persistent rise in food prices, which has hit 8.66%. The food inflation has touched 8.66%. So that is why the editorial is calling upon the government and the RBI to take some immediate steps to tackle the rising food inflation in the country. Now let's get an idea about the kind of rise that we are seeing in food prices. Because you never know, there can be a prelims or even a mains question where UPSC might ask you to examine the inflation trends in the economy over the last few months, or how the current inflation trends are impacting the macroeconomic environment. Such a direct question can be asked. If you look at food prices in India, right, especially vegetable prices and even cereal, and as well as the protein based items like milk, dairy products, egg and meat, these commodities are seeing a significant jump in their prices. On one hand, demand also has gone up. Demand has increased, particularly for certain types of cereals, certain types of food commodities, especially the protein-based food items, right? For milk, dairy, egg, meat. there has been a significant jump in demand as today people are having more disposable income, right? So more people tend to splurge some money on these items. And this leads to a rise in demand, which is not being matched by the supply side. Plus, there are supply side constraints, especially with regard to vegetables, basic vegetables that we all consume. There are supply side challenges caused by low rainfall, frequent drought conditions, and the overall inefficiency that we have on the back end of the supply chain. It's leading to a lot of wastage of food crops and commodities, and this is contributing to a crunch with regard to the supply of basic vegetables, fruits, and other food items. If you look at the food category, right, in the CPI basket, I told you that food and beverages has 46% weightage. Now, within this category, vegetables have the third highest weightage. Now, this could be a prelims question. A possible prelims question can be asked. Within food inflation in the CPI basket, vegetables have the third highest allocation. Cereals have the largest weightage. Please remember this. All right? So since vegetables have a significant weightage within the food category, especially the rise in prices of basic vegetables, that is the top vegetables, that is tomato, onion, and potato, right? These are the basic vegetables that we all consume on a day-to-day basis. In fact, it is also said that the top vegetables are so politically sensitive that they can directly influence elections as well. We have seen many instances where governments have been toppled because the governments were not capable of containing the price rise in onions or tomatoes or potatoes. It's quite interesting to observe this assessment because these are very humble day-to-day vegetables that we all consume, but they have the potential to bring down governments, to change election results, because that is the kind of impact it has on the common man, right? The common people on the ground. These are the basic vegetables that they rely upon. And if they see a sudden jump in their prices, and if the government and the authorities are not able to contain the prices, right, definitely this will lead to an electoral impact as well. So that is what the editorial is flagging. It's flagging the rise in vegetable prices, which has been very consistent over the last many months. And across the food sector, right, prices have been increasing quite consistently. And this is a major concern because this could spill over and it could affect the broader inflation levels, which could push the RBI to come and contain inflation, which could hurt our growth prospects as well. Now, the biggest problem that we are facing with regard to food supplies, vegetable supplies, and supply of other essential food items, it has to deal with the supply side problem primarily. Especially if you look at tomato, onion, potatoes, right? The poor rainfall that India has received and the adverse weather conditions, the drought situation in large parts of India, particularly in southern parts of India, in parts of central and eastern parts of India as well, right? Which are all major hubs of production for producing these vegetables, right? We have seen a big impact because of the drop in production. And also, the assessments for the next few months is also quite alarming because of the El Nino impact. Monsoon rains are expected to be hit, right? And already water levels in most of our dams and reservoirs is at an all-time low. If you look at data from the Central Water Commission, which monitors water levels in all the major dams and reservoirs, right? Most of the reservoirs in India, almost 150 major reservoirs in India, they are reporting a storage level which is 40% below the average, right? And we've already studied about the water crisis in different parts of India, right, in previous sessions. So the poor rainfall, the limited water that is available in our dams and reservoirs, plus the drought situation, which is a major concern, right? This could affect the summer production of these basic vegetables and food crops, and it could further create a shortage in the market. Now, the government had taken some steps a few months ago. 3 months ago, the government banned the export of onions. Otherwise, India is actually a major exporter of onions. But since the domestic demand was not being met, and since there was a major supply side crunch which was coming up, right, and given that this is the election year, the government didn't want to take any chance as onion prices are politically very sensitive. So 3 months ago itself, the government imposed a ban on onion exports but this has not helped in cooling down the prices. These short-term measures will not help. So that is why the focus should be on increasing our production, improving efficiency in our food supply chain. Because a lot of food commodities, they go to waste. Because these food commodities, they have a very short shelf life. And you need modern logistics. You need modern warehouses, cold storage facilities, right? To ensure that you increase the shelf life of the essential vegetables, fruits, and other food commodities. So this is a big weakness when it comes to the back end of India's food supply chain. And along with that, we need to focus on increasing our production as well. These short-term measures like banning exports and other short-term ad hoc measures on the supply side will not help, because we need concrete long-term measures. So keeping in mind the upcoming drought situation and the prevailing water scarcity in the country, the government should act quickly. The Ministry of Agriculture and other concerned ministries, they have to act very quickly to manage the supply side problems. Here the RBI can't do much. It's the government which has to ease the problems on the supply side, right? So if this is not addressed, and if food inflation continues to persist like this, it will force the RBI, it will force the Monetary Policy Committee to raise the repo rate, to increase the benchmark interest rates. And if RBI employs the monetary policy tools, the problem is it will suck out the excess liquidity. And if liquidity is taken out, loans will become expensive. Banks may not be able to provide cheaper credit to the borrowers, to the industries, to the enterprises and the businesses. And as a result, this could affect the growth and expansion prospects of the Indian economy, right? At the same time, if inflation is not addressed, let's say the government decides to focus more on growth, even at the risk of increasing inflation, right? And RBI also agrees with the assessment. And Monetary Policy Committee, if it does not raise the rates to contain inflation, the rising prices will hurt the people. It will hurt the consumers, right? Especially those at the bottom sections, those who can't afford the higher prices. They will be affected. Their nutrition levels could be affected. Their consumption will go down. Consumption of certain products and commodities will go down. And if consumption reduces, it affects demand in the economy. So it would create a vicious cycle, right? If demand goes down, even then growth will be affected. So this is the complex relationship that exists between inflation and managing growth. This is a very challenging task for the Monetary Policy Committee. So both for RBI and the government, ideally there should be a balance between the two. There should be moderate levels of inflation with focus on growth. But if inflation starts increasing persistently, right, even if it is just food inflation, given that it has a higher weightage, it will eventually spill over into retail inflation, that is headline CPI inflation, which will force the monetary policy authorities to act. And if they try to contain inflation by increasing interest rates, and if they try to absorb the excess liquidity, it will hurt the growth prospects of the Indian economy, right? And also, when prices keep on increasing, many other socio-economic challenges come up, especially the poor people will be more affected, and any such growth will not be inclusive, right? If authorities simply focus on growth with no focus on inflation control, even that is extremely dangerous, because any such growth which happens will not be inclusive and sustainable. It will be leaving behind the weaker sections, the poor sections, right? And they won't be able to deal with the burden caused by the price rise. And when there is a broad general price rise across sectors, the impact will be borne by the customers, by the consumers. So consumption levels will go down, demand will get affected, and again growth will get affected. So if we wish not to enter this vicious cycle, then it's important to maintain a balance between the inflation objectives and the growth objectives. So this is where Monetary Policy Committee has a very big role to play, and the government has a bigger responsibility to ease the supply side constraints. So this is what the article is talking about. It is essentially flagging the concerns raised by persistently high food inflation. It is warning the government and the RBI that they should not be complicit just because overall CPI inflation is still manageable. Right? Overall CPI inflation is still at 5.1%, which is within the tolerable limits. And more importantly, CPI inflation has remained quite stagnant over the last few months. So this should not make the RBI and the government complicit, right? Because if food inflation persists like this, it will spill over eventually, and it could lead to this vicious cycle, right? Where handling inflation and boosting growth could become a dilemma for the monetary policy authorities. Is that clear? So that is the core point of this editorial. So along with these basic concepts that we have discussed, I think you should be able to handle any prelims question based on this, or even a full-fledged mains question on this particular topic. So before we start the next article, please take a look at the free special classes that we have scheduled for today on the Unacademy app. Today morning, Mukesh sir has already taken up a class with regard to geography NCERT fundamentals. And in the afternoon at 12 p.m., Asta ma'am will be taking up a current affairs revision session by using MCQ questions. The links for these classes is provided in the video description below. Now let's look at the next column. This column is written by the Ambassador of Republic of Ireland to India, Kevin Kelly. So this article basically commemorates the 75 years of diplomatic relations between India and the Republic of Ireland. The writer is examining the common interests that India and Ireland have and the opportunities that are there for India and Ireland as far as their diplomatic relationship is concerned. So let's take a look at this. Let's go a little deep into the topic, because with regard to Ireland, there have been some related topics which have been in the news. Even though it's not a very important topic for the exam, right? Still, at least knowing about India-Ireland relations and some issues related to the Irish region can be significant for the exam. It should be a part of your general understanding. And also, the article is referring to a very important cultural event, the St. Patrick's Day Festival, which is a major festival for the Irish people, right? So the writer is talking about these cultural symbols of the Irish people, and he is also mentioning the various common traits that we share, that Indians and Irish people share with each other, right? So there are some interesting points he's bringing up. So let's have a discussion on this and then look at India-Ireland relations. So here you're looking at the map of Republic of Ireland. Essentially, this region, which I'm marking right now, this is Republic of Ireland, which is a separate, independent, sovereign country. And also please note down, this country is a member of European Union. It's a EU member. It's part of the European Union, Customs Union and the Free Trade Area. It's also part of the Schengen zone of the EU. All right, so this is Republic of Ireland. Now, can you see there is another part of Ireland over here towards the north, which is called Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of United Kingdom, right? You can see the map of Great Britain or UK as well over here. So it's important to note the distinctions that are present and the sovereign boundaries that are present over here. So when I say UK, United Kingdom, or just Britain, let's say, it refers to 4 independent sovereign regions which are part of the sovereign country of UK. These 4 regions include England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So these 4 independent sovereign territories, they form the sovereign nation of UK or Britain. Is that clear? So this is one country. So UK was a EU member until 2016. But in 2016, the people of Britain decided to exit the European Union. The UK held a referendum, which is popularly called Brexit, right? And majority of them, 52% of British citizens, they voted for Britain exiting the EU. This exit process was completed after a few years, and right now, UK is not a EU member. The United Kingdom is no longer a part of the European Union. Now, let us take a quick look at the interesting history of this region as well. I just told you the current boundaries that exist and the current geopolitical divisions that exist in this part of the world. Now let's look at the brief history of this region as well. See, Britain, which colonized most of the world, it had colonized the Irish region as well. Just like Britain had colonized India, right? It had colonized many islands across the world, many countries in Asia, many countries in Africa. Similarly, even the entire Irish region that you just saw in the map, that includes both Northern and Republic of Ireland, they were all part of British territory at one point, until 1921. Now here, there is a major religious divide as well. There is a major religious divide. What is the religious divide? Irish region is largely Catholic. Majority of Irish people, right, be it in Republic of Ireland or even in Northern Ireland, they are Catholics, Catholic Christians. But however, most people in Britain, especially in England, Wales, and even in Scotland, right, majority of them are Protestants. So there is an age-old rivalry between Catholics and Protestants, which has been a feature of Britain's monarchy as well. You might have seen many popular movies and web shows and web series as well, which deal with this theme of the divide between the Catholics and Protestants in Europe, particularly related to the British monarchy, right? So the Irish region has always been majority Catholic. The British region has always been majority Protestant. So this has always been a major political, geopolitical factor as well. The Irish people, they resented British control over their territory. In 1919, after the end of the First World War, Britain had just won the First World War with its group of allied powers. Immediately after the First World War, the Irish people began a rebellion. Just like there were nationalist movements going on around British colonies, right, in India as well. The freedom struggle was raging in India and around the world in all of the British colonies. The decolonization movement or the nationalist independence movement had started. Similarly, in the Irish region as well, the Irish people, they rebelled against British rule under the Irish Republican Army. So it was indeed a revolutionary, violent rebellion as well. And this led to the Anglo-Irish War. The Anglo-Irish War that started in 1919 lasted until 1921. So following these 2 years of conflict, finally, a part of Ireland was liberated by the Irish people, which today is your Republic of Ireland. That is how Republic of Ireland became a separate nation, a separate independent sovereign country. It won its independence by fighting against British colonization, and in 1922, Republic of Ireland became independent. But however, Northern Ireland remained under Britain's control, and even today, it remains under British control. Is that clear? So this is one part of history that you should be familiar with. Next, there is another interesting element here. So this essentially was your Republic of Ireland, right, which became independent after the Anglo-Irish War. This was the Northern Ireland Territory, which was with UK. Now, as long as both of them were part of European Union, there was no major issue as such. But with Britain deciding to exit EU, a major problem developed with regard to the border controls and the taxation policies that had to be followed between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. To understand this, you should also understand about Irish insurgency that was witnessed in Northern Ireland from 1950s till 1990s. See, don't assume that Britain has always been very stable, right? Even Britain has gone through a lot of these problems, including major security situations. So Britain used to treat Irish insurgency as acts of terrorism. But the natives of Northern Ireland, they always sought reunification with Republic of Ireland. They wanted to eliminate this border here and reunite Northern Ireland with Republic of Ireland, especially the Catholics. Because in Northern Ireland, you find some Protestants as well. Again, please go back to the previous map. You can see the yellow shaded areas here around the city of Belfast. These are Protestant dominant areas. They are the loyalists. They are called unionists, meaning they want to remain part of UK. They don't want Northern Ireland ever to break away from Britain. So they support UK or Britain. Can you see the green areas here in Northern Ireland? These are the Catholic areas. They want a reunification. They want to liberate the area from Britain, erase these borders and reunite with Ireland. So in 1950s, a brutal insurgency started here with support by Irish nationalists from Republic of Ireland. In Northern Ireland, the Irish Republican Army started out its major insurgency against Britain. So this region has been affected by a brutal conflict for many decades. Several attacks would take place in Northern Ireland and as well as in Britain and UK, where these Irish nationalists would carry out these attacks against British targets. So this insurgent war had destabilized the region. The war lasted for a good 4 decades. And finally, the insurgency was ended in the year 1998 with the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. By signing the Good Friday Agreement, the Irish insurgency was brought to an end. So Britain promised to end its war against the Irish insurgents. The Irish insurgents also surrendered, ended their war against Britain. And in return, Britain made a promise. Britain made a commitment under the Good Friday Agreement that there would be no hard border and no border controls and immigration controls between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, so that the people of Northern Ireland can freely move to Republic of Ireland. Even the goods that are sent from Northern Ireland to Republic of Ireland and vice versa, they could enjoy free trade access. And to ensure that this would happen, a commitment was made in the Good Friday Agreement that this would be largely an open, free border. So there would be no hard border controls, there would be no immigration checks or security checks or passport controls, so that the people of Northern Ireland and the goods from here could easily move to Republic of Ireland and as well as the other way around. Now this arrangement was easily possible before 2016 because both the territories, both the countries here were part of European Union. UK was also a EU member. Republic of Ireland was also a EU member. So as part of European Union, they were part of the same free trade area and customs union. So it didn't matter whether Britain, continued to maintain the free border, because as EU members, they were bound to maintain free borders, allowing for free movement of people and goods. But with Britain's exit from EU, a new challenge came up. What will be the border control along this sensitive border between Northern Ireland, which is British territory, and Republic of Ireland, which is a separate country that is a EU member? Because EU rules will not allow a free border with a non-EU country. Now that UK became a non-EU member, right, it became a non-EU country, European Union will not tolerate any kind of free borders here. If there are goods entering from UK to Republic of Ireland, it is as good as goods are entering from UK to EU market, which means EU will expect these goods to be checked and taxed accordingly. But if a hard border comes up here with border restrictions, border security and border control, this will instigate the Irish people, especially in Northern Ireland. The concern was this could again revive the Irish insurgency if hard borders are brought back. So to ensure that this arrangement could be worked out without a hard border, a Brexit deal was worked out. UK negotiated with European Union and Republic of Ireland, and they came out with an arrangement which would allow the free borders in Ireland. Essentially, movement of people, movement of goods will not be restricted as promised under Good Friday Agreement. But however, goods that are entering from Great Britain, that is England, Wales and Scotland, before they reach Northern Ireland ports, they would be subjected to a security and immigration check. So essentially, the hard border came up over here, not over here. Because this hard border will affect the Irish people. It will affect their movement, which was promised under Good Friday Agreement. So under the Brexit deal, all the stakeholders, they agreed that there won't be a hard border here. The free border will continue between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. But however, immigration controls will come up over here, where goods from UK that are entering Northern Ireland will be checked. Immigration security checks will happen, and accordingly taxes, duties will be levied as well if they are headed towards Republic of Ireland, which is an EU member. But this deal created a big problem. The problem was, within UK, movement of goods was getting affected. Because see, don't forget, Northern Ireland is part of UK. So when goods were being sent from here, from England, Scotland, Wales towards Northern Ireland, even those internal movement of goods was getting affected and delayed because of the border checks, the immigration checks that came up here. So there was a shortage of supplies in Northern Ireland. So within UK, movement of goods got affected because of the deal. Plus, EU concerns were also not addressed. EU was still worried that goods from UK are easily entering Republic of Ireland, which is a EU market. So that is why this treaty was revised. Last year, a new framework agreement was worked out between UK and European Union and Republic of Ireland. And there is a new system which has been implemented. Now, I'll not tell you the name of this agreement. I want you guys to find out what is the name of this landmark agreement that was signed last year in 2023. Please mention that in the comments below. So here you can see the new arrangement which has been created. There are two different channels for the movement of goods that has been established right now. There is a green channel where goods passing within UK will pass freely. Let's say the goods are being sent from England to Northern Ireland or from Northern Ireland to Scotland. Those goods will not be subjected to any kind of checks or duties or taxes. Why? Because these four territories are part of UK. This is just internal movement, domestic movement of goods within UK. So by doing this, UK's sovereignty and its economic sovereignty was protected. But those goods which are destined to enter Republic of Ireland, which is a EU market, right? They will be sent through the red channel. So in the red channel, the security checks, immigration checks will take place, and only these goods moving from UK to Republic of Ireland, they will be taxed according to existing tariffs. Whereas the free border here will remain to operate. The free open border that exists here between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, that will continue to exist as promised under the Good Friday Agreement. So this is the unique arrangement that was created by this landmark agreement that was signed last year. So please find out the name of this agreement and mention that in the comments below. Now, some of you might be wondering, why did I explain this entire history and all these complicated issues related to UK and EU? Trust me, this is very relevant for India for two reasons. One, these are very important markets for India. Be it UK, be it European Union, and even Republic of Ireland. These are major markets for India. We have big exports headed towards these countries. We are in the process of negotiating free trade agreements with UK and European Union. Plus, there is a strong Indian community that resides in these areas. Be it in Republic of Ireland, in Northern Ireland, in UK, right? There are many Indians. There's a very strong Indian diaspora community. And obviously, all these developments are of concern to India. Again, it may not be a very important topic, but I feel for prelims at least, some of the discussions we have had can be relevant. And you never know, there could be a possible mains question, right? Because of the agreement signed last year, there could be a mains question, and it is important to just know the basics of India-Ireland relations as well. As I told you, this year is marking the 75th year of diplomatic relations between India and Republic of Ireland. So UPSC might pick up a question based on the anniversary. So let's look at the common history that we have and the common opportunities that we have going forward. And after that, we can head to the prelim section. See, one common point you have to highlight is the anti-colonial struggle of both India and the Irish people. Just like India fought against Britain's colonization, right? And just like we led a freedom movement, similarly, the Irish people have fought for their independence. Methods might be different, the tactics might have been different, but eventually, Irish people were also frustrated with British colonial exploitation. So they threw out the British by fighting the Anglo-Irish War from 1919 to 1921. 2 decades later, India also became independent as a result of its freedom movement. So our anti-colonial struggle, our stand against colonialism, imperialism, is something that binds India and Ireland together. Next, we have common views on global conflicts, on international humanitarian rules. Because today the world is being consumed by various conflicts. We have the Russia-Ukraine war, the Gaza war which is going on, and many other civil war situations across different countries. So India, Ireland have a common position on these wars, conflicts, and international humanitarian laws because we both have suffered enough. The Irish people have suffered because of the war, the insurgency. India also has suffered because of large-scale communal violence during partition, right? Because of colonial abusive policies and the wars that we have fought, and how India is a victim of terrorism, right? India itself is a victim of terrorism and insurgency. So we have a shared experience, a common experience, and this pushes India and Ireland to have a common position on these global issues. So this is something that will keep India and Ireland together, and this was very evident at the UN Security Council a couple of years ago. Between 2021 to 2022, India and Republic of Ireland, they both occupied the non-permanent seat at the UNSC. This was India's 8th term as a non-permanent member of UN Security Council. And when India was a non-permanent member, even Republic of Ireland was a non-permanent member. So we together collectively acted to protect the rules-based order. During this term, as UNSC members, India and Ireland worked together on most global issues, including the situation in Afghanistan, the situation in Yemen, in Myanmar, right? These were all developing security situations. So India and Ireland, they worked together as non-permanent members to uphold international humanitarian law and to maintain the rules-based order. So this clearly explains why India, Ireland can work together. Plus, there are tremendous opportunities available, especially economic opportunities. As I told you, Republic of Ireland is an EU member, right? EU is one of India's largest export markets. It's a major export destination for our farmers, for our industries, especially MSME industries of India. We are in the process of negotiating a free trade agreement called BTIA, the Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement, which is a FTA. It's being negotiated between India and EU. So given that Ireland is a EU member, good relations with Ireland will help us to fast-track the free trade negotiations which are going on. This free trade agreement has been held up for many years because EU countries are developed countries. India is a developing nation. Because of our differences on various issues, we have not been able to finalize the free trade deal. So good relations with each individual member could help address the concerns that we have. And maybe very soon, we can have a free trade agreement. And also don't forget, Ireland is home to many top companies and businesses. Some of the top IT companies are based out of Ireland. Ireland has some of the most investment-friendly laws. It favors protection of digital privacy. It favors ease of doing business, right? It has matched its policies, laws, and regulations with EU standards as it is an EU member. So it is a preferred destination for many top companies in the IT domain, even in medical technology industry, clean energy, and many other sectors. Now, this is something which is in common for India, right? India is a top IT destination, and India is a major exporter of IT products, right? So there is close collaboration between many Indian companies and Irish companies. And clean energy is a focus sector for India. We are planning a transition, right, from fossil fuels towards cleaner fuels. And many Irish companies are global leaders in this domain. So there are many such areas where our private companies can work together and collaborate, and it can drive investments as well, from India to Ireland and from Ireland to India. Now, Ireland is a highly developed nation. It has a very high Human Development Index, and in the HDI report of the UNDP, Ireland is usually in the top 10. Yesterday, I was mentioning the Human Development Index report of UNDP, right? Usually Switzerland and a few Scandinavian countries are in the top 3, top 5. Ireland is usually in the top 10 at least. So it means it has a very high human development index. It has done very well with regard to basic education, healthcare, and in improving standard of living, right? So that is something India can learn from. As India struggles with some sectors like education, healthcare, etc., right? And even with employment, skill development, these are key areas where we can draw from the experiences of Ireland. And there is a area of collaboration that is present here. And more importantly, we have very close human-to-human or people-to-people relations. Very close cultural ties exist because there is a very strong Indian diaspora in Ireland. According to recent data, there are at least more than 80,000 Indians residing in Republic of Ireland alone. Every year, almost 10,000 Indian students are studying in Irish universities. So this forms a very strong cultural connection, a people-to-people connection that binds the two countries together, right? So with this, you can easily write, let's say there is a 10-mark question on this, or any basic prelims question related to the trade deal and the agreements that we were discussing. You can easily answer any of these questions. So this completes my detailed discussion of the two important articles that we had. Now let's quickly head towards the prelims section. Look at this article on page number 14. According to the article, Indian Railways is launching a new initiative to set up multi-modal transport hubs in aspirational cities. Aspirational cities are essentially tier 2 and tier 3 cities in India, which have a population of around 10 lakh, or basically 1 million. So these aspirational cities have been selected as part of the Viksit Bharat initiative. The Modi government has launched this as a major program to achieve a developed India by 2047, right? To achieve a Viksit Bharat, a developed India by 2047. So as part of this ambitious goal that has been set, our city transportation infrastructure has to be modified as well and upgraded. So Indian Railways is launching this major initiative focused on urban mobility and urban transportation. So in these aspirational cities, which are essentially tier 2, tier 3 cities in India, which have a 1 million population or 10 lakh population and above, multimodal transportation hubs will be created by the Indian Railways. That is, the railway station, the main city railway station, will be used as the hub where other forms of transportation will be integrated. It could be urban metro rails or road transportation, bus transportation, right? So all these different modes of transportation, including cargo and freight transportation, they will all be integrated at the city railway station. So modern facilities will be created with the ability for multimodal transportation that will benefit passengers and it will benefit the cargo movement as well. So this is part of Viksit Bharat initiative. So please make a note of this. Next, on the same page, we have an article referring to the Cinematograph certification rules 2024 that has been notified by the Government of India. So let's understand what is the Cinematograph Act, just the basic details, and what are the new rules. What does it provide for? See, first we had the Cinematograph Act of 1952. It basically regulated films and motion pictures. That's your cinema, right? Be it film certification, right, which is done by the CBFC, the Central Board of Film Certification. This was regulated under this act. The CBFC itself is a statutory body set up through the Cinematograph Act of 1952. Now recently this old act was replaced by the new Cinematograph Act. And under that, the rules have been notified. The 2024 rules have been notified. So these rules are designed to facilitate more progressive and modern certification of films. And it is also focusing on increasing representation of women in the CBFC board. So that is the primary focus of the new rules that have been notified. So please take a look at the changes that are happening with regard to film certification in India. So when you watch movies in theaters or even on OTT platforms, you would have seen that the movie begins with a certificate which is shown at the beginning, right? The certificate is issued by the CBFC. depending on the content of the movie, right? Movies are rated as adult or universal or UA, and there is an age-based categorization as well. The idea is to ensure that adult content is not exposed to children, because minor children below the age of 18, right? It's not ideal to show them explicit content. It could be sexually explicit content, it could be gore, violence, or consumption of drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, etc. Right? So any such objectionable content, if it's present in a movie, right, the CBFC will accordingly give it a rating. Right? The moment you look at adult rating, it means that it's not suitable for minor children. Plus there is age-based categorization under the UA category. So this is being upgraded right now. Under the UA category, right, where children can watch the movie with adult supervision, basically parents or guardians can decide, depending on the categorization, whether they should allow their children to watch this movie or not. So here, within the UA category, a age-specific categorization is being provided, which is a new introduction. UA 7+, meaning a kid of 7 years and above can watch this content. UA 13+, UA 16+. So essentially, depending on the age of the child, right, and depending on the rating given to a movie, parents or guardians can decide whether their child can watch this or not. So this ensures that artistic expression, creative freedom, which is part of Article 19, that is freedom of speech and expression, is protected while protecting our children from potentially explicit content. So that is one big change which is being introduced. Along with the age-based certification system, there is a change being introduced with regard to the certification process. Right now, film certification has gone completely online. Movie makers can send the movies for certification along with the application completely online. Right? This reduces the time taken. It reduces any discrepancies or any subjectivity. Right? And it eliminates the transactional time. The certificates are also issued online by the CBFC. All right, so this is one big change which is being introduced. Plus, the rules are trying to make the CBFC more inclusive, and even the films are being made more inclusive. For example, the movie makers are being mandated through the CBFC representation, the board representation, will have more women members to ensure that there is equitable gender representation. The rules are mandating that at least 1/3 of the members in the board should be women, and preferably at least 1/2, that is 50% of the board members should be women. So these are the changes being introduced by the Cinematograph rules of 2024, which is notified under the new Cinematograph Act. Next, on page 14, we have an article related to the Apache attack helicopters. You can see this helicopter here in the image. It's an attack helicopter used for ground attack operations. It's one of the most lethal and most advanced attack helicopter in the world, which is produced by Boeing, which is a US-based defense manufacturer, right? So it's a US product designed, developed, and produced by Boeing Aerospace. So India has procured the Apache helicopters from the United States. This is part of the growing India-US defense relationship. So India has procured Apache helicopters for Indian Air Force and even for the Indian Army. I hope you know that the Indian Army has a separate aviation unit, the Army Aviation Corps, which provides air support for ground operations. So this is where ground attack helicopters like Apache can be lethal, right? So India has signed these contracts with Boeing. We have already procured and inducted some of the Apache helicopters into the Indian Air Force and also into the Indian Army. Now we are looking at a further extension of the deal. Both Indian Air Force, Indian Army, they want a new batch of Apache helicopters. And according to the article, there is a new Apache unit being stationed in Jodhpur with focus on India-Pakistan border, right? This attack helicopter unit of the Indian Army is being raised in Jodhpur. So these are some basic facts that you should be aware of because it's related to India's defense modernization and also related to India-US relations. Next, on page 15, we have this article that refers to a wind power project being executed by India's Adani group in Sri Lanka. In northern Sri Lanka, between the Jaffna region, the Jaffna Peninsula, and the coastline of Tamil Nadu, that is basically in the Park Strait and Gulf of Mannar region, there are few important islands like the Delft Island. So on these islands, Sri Lanka is coming up with few renewable energy projects. It's coming up with solar and wind renewable energy projects in this part of Jaffna and Mannar region. Initially, Sri Lanka had given these projects to a Chinese company. When Rajapaksa brothers were in power, when Gotabaya Rajapaksa was the president and Mahinda Rajapaksa was the prime minister, right? The Rajapaksa family, which was seen as pro-China, they had awarded these contracts to a Chinese company. So then India was very alarmed and concerned that Chinese companies are going to execute these key projects so close to India's coastline, right? Because from Delft Island, the coast of Tamil Nadu is barely few nautical miles away. So India had objected to this project, and India also proposed an alternative. Thanks to the economic crisis in Sri Lanka, Rajapaksa brothers were thrown out, and India gave almost $4 billion in assistance, which gave India leverage over Sri Lanka as well. So the next Sri Lankan government awarded this project to India's Adani group. So Adani group is executing an offshore wind project. That is, wind turbines are being set up in the offshore facilities here around the Delft and Jaffna region. And right now, these projects have run into fresh problems. Basically, on environmental grounds, local people and environmental activists have been protesting against the project. Their concern is that, see, Gulf of Mannar is a protected area. It's a biosphere reserve, if you know, right? On the Indian side, Gulf of Mannar is a biosphere reserve. On the Sri Lankan side as well, these are protected areas. Gulf of Mannar and the Jaffna region and even the Park Bay. All these are protected areas in Sri Lanka. So the fishermen and environmental activists, they fear that these projects could be detrimental to the coastal and marine environment. Fishermen are worried that it could affect the catch that is available to them. Also, the concern is that when large wind turbines are set up in these open seas, right, they could be detrimental to the birds, especially migratory birds. And the Mannar region and the wetlands present around it, they are part of a critical bird migration route, that is the Central Asian Flyway. This is a migratory route where birds from Central Asia and even from Russian Siberia, they migrate towards South Asia by moving across the Himalayas. They reach southern India and even Sri Lanka to find warmer habitats, mainly for the breeding season. So environmental activists are pointing out that these projects may not only threaten the marine organisms, they could threaten migratory bird species as well. Because Mannar region and the wetlands around it, they are part of Central Asian Flyway, which is a critical migratory route. So that is why this project, right, which is critical for India as well, is facing obstacles. However, experts have another concern. Now, this is a common pattern that we have seen wherever India, China are in competition. For example, in Mauritius, in Maldives, in Seychelles, India has taken up similar projects, some of them having a strategic angle to it. And even there, we have seen such local protests happening, and there are reasons to believe that some of the protests could be sponsored by China. We have seen this happening in Nepal as well. In Nepal's hydropower sector, right? When India tried to invest in hydropower projects, there would be a lot of local opposition based on environmental concerns and social concerns. And Indian intelligence agencies had reasons to believe that these local protests led by local politicians were sponsored primarily by China. Because in all these countries in South Asia and Indian Ocean, there is a direct strategic competition between India and China, right? But again, it is purely speculation, right? But that is something you should know as well, because many analysts and experts believe that these protests may not be entirely genuine, right? So next, we have an article on page 15 that refers to the Russia-Ukraine war. And in that context, there is a reference made to the UN Human Rights Council. Russia has been accused by a UN panel of committing large-scale human rights violations in Ukraine. And this panel has submitted its report to the UN Human Rights Council, or UNHRC. So please note down the basic facts about UNHRC. It can be very important for your prelims. The UN Human Rights Council, in its current form, was established in the year 2006. It is headquartered at Geneva in Switzerland, and it consists of 47 members. 47 countries are elected on a rotational basis for a 3-year term. Out of the 190 plus UN members that are there, right, periodic elections are held once in every 3 years, and 47 countries are nominated. Essentially, they are elected and they hold the representation at the Human Rights Council. Is that clear? So the representation here is on the basis of a geographical quota. For every region, there are certain number of seats assigned. Like for Asia, Asia Pacific, for Africa, for Eurasia region, North America and South America. Like this, for different regions, certain number of seats are assigned and elections are held every 3 years. And finally, 47 countries are chosen to represent these different regions. So this is the human rights body of the UN. Is that clear? It basically replaced the earlier human rights organization, which was the UN Commission on Human Rights. So this old organization had run into a lot of controversies. It was often alleged that some countries were misusing this body for geopolitical reasons, and they were deliberately accusing few countries of violating human rights. So as a result, this organization was replaced by UNHRC, UN Human Rights Council. But even with UNHRC, there are similar allegations that only few countries are targeted selectively, largely based on geopolitical reasons. So the functioning of UNHRC has always been quite controversial. All right. So please know the basic details, the basic composition of UNHRC, and this could be very important. It works very closely with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So it's responsible for upholding international humanitarian law. Coming to the last article from Economy on page 16, India has decided to cut import duties on import of electric vehicles. This is being done primarily to attract the popular EV company Tesla. Tesla, owned by Elon Musk, has been hesitant to enter the Indian market because currently, if a fully assembled EV car is imported into India, the taxes, import duties are in the range of 70 to 100%, which is basically a trade barrier, right? This is a complete trade wall that prevents any kind of import of assembled vehicles into India. Unless you're a high net worth individual, you cannot afford these imported cars because the taxes, the import duties alone would be 70 to 100%. Apart from that, there would be other custom duties, plus the freight and transportation charges, registration charges. So even a car costing 1 crore could become easily 3 to 5 crores, right? So India has always been protective with regard to its automobile market. Deliberately, these duties were placed very high, and especially for EVs and assembled cars, the taxes were in the range of 70 to 100%. Many times, Tesla and Elon Musk have spoken about this. They have said the reason why Tesla is not entering India is because of the high import duties. So now, Indian government has decided, the Ministry of Commerce has decided to cut the import duties, and it's brought down the import duties to just 15% for assembled EV cars. But there is one condition. The condition is that within 3 years, Tesla has to open a manufacturing plant in India and produce cars in India with at least 25% domestic value addition. This is the condition placed by India. So as of now, Tesla can start importing the cars directly into India. Even assembled cars from other markets can be directly brought into India and sold in India. Import duties will just be 15%. But the condition is that within 3 years, Tesla has to open a domestic manufacturing plant with a minimum amount of investment which has been specified. Meaning it has to create jobs in the Indian economy. It has to create an EV manufacturing ecosystem in India and ensure that at least 25% domestic value addition is happening. Is that clear? So this will create the base, the foundation needed for EV automobiles in India. It will bring foreign expertise as well. It will open up the market and it will benefit these companies as well. So this is a big policy change as far as electric vehicles and import of automobiles is concerned into India. So this completes my detailed discussion of today's The Hindu newspaper. And please take a look at the practice questions. You can use them for your answer writing practice. Just go through the questions. It's all based on what we have studied in the editorial and in the column. So you can use the exact same discussion and the points and the structure that I provided to write an answer to these questions. So I hope the session was fruitful and I hope you guys have understood everything. Do let me know what you think in the comments below. So that is it for today. If you like the session, do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So we'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a great weekend.